What if the place Iran trusted most was not a missile, not a commander, but a mountain? And what if one strike did not just hit a target, but exposed the limits of hiding power underground? Before we go deeper, do me one favor. If you like sharp breakdowns without the noise, tap like, subscribe, and share this with one friend who loves serious world affairs. For years, Iran built a military idea around one simple belief. If your weapons are easy to see, they're easy to destroy. So the answer was to bury them. Deep, under rock, behind tunnel doors, inside mountain complexes that could survive surveillance, airstrikes, and even repeated attacks on the same region. That is the basic idea behind Iran's so-called underground missile cities. They were built to protect launchers, missiles, fuel, parts, and the people needed to keep the system working. And few places matter more in that system than the wider Isfahan area. According to the public record, the Isfahan missile complex has long been described as Iran's largest missile assembly and production site. It has been linked to propellant production, missile components, and assembly work tied to major missile systems. That matters because it tells us something simple but huge. Isfahan is not just a random patch of desert with a few bunkers. It sits near one of the key engines behind Iran's missile power. So when people hear a title like Inside Iran's Underground Missile Base, the US strike. Explained, the real story is not just about one bomb, one tunnel, or one flash in the night sky. The real story is about a long contest between concealment and penetration. One side builds deeper, the other side builds stronger weapons, better targeting, and more patient intelligence. Now here is where things get important. Public reporting often turns these events into something simpler than they really are. A video goes viral, a clip shows smoke, fire, or secondary blasts, and within minutes the internet decides exactly what happened, which bomb was used, and what the result means. But the public record is more complicated than that. What was publicly confirmed in 2025 was that the United States carried out major strikes against Iranian underground infrastructure. This campaign used B-2 bombers, Tomahawk missiles, and GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrators in parts of the wider effort. Reporting tied Tomahawks to Isfahan, while the GBU-57 bombs were publicly described in connection with Natanz and Fordo, not clearly confirmed for Isfahan itself. In other words, we do have confirmed information about major U.S. strikes on underground Iranian targets, but not every online claim about every individual underground site is equally verified. That distinction matters because it changes the question. Instead of asking, did one strike destroy everything? The better question is about limits. What can outside powers realistically do to an underground missile system like this, and what can they not do? To answer that, we need to understand why underground bases exist. Imagine you are a military planner, and you know your enemy has satellites, stealth aircraft, precision missiles, and enough intelligence coverage to watch roads, airfields, launch pads, and warehouses. Anything above ground is a liability. Every open ramp becomes a target. Every visible truck movement becomes a clue. Every fixed launcher becomes a countdown clock. So you move the system under a mountain. A mountain gives you more than camouflage. It gives you delay. It forces the attacker to do hard things in sequence. First, find the right mountain, then find the right entrances. Then figure out which entrances are real, which are decoys, and which ones are active today. Then decide whether to target doors, roads, ventilation points, power links, storage chambers, or launch routes. Then choose a weapon that can survive impact and penetrate rock. The weapon must survive reinforced structures and detonate at the right moment. And even after all of that, you still may not destroy what is deepest inside. That is why underground warfare is so frustrating. It is not clean, it is not instant, it is a game of geometry, guesswork, and endurance. And this is exactly why bunker busters matter so much in public discussion. These weapons are designed to drive themselves into the ground before exploding. This design ensures more of the force goes into the buried target instead of blowing outward in the air. In the case of the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, public analysis has described a weapon weighing around 13.5 tons and believed to penetrate deeply under the right conditions. But the same reporting also stresses uncertainty. Even after major strikes, outsiders cannot always conclusively say whether every intended underground target was truly destroyed. That uncertainty is not a weakness in analysis, it is the reality of attacking buried infrastructure. If a weapon explodes too early, a deeply buried chamber may survive. If it goes too deep, or misses the correct axis of the tunnel network, the blast may not do what planners hoped. If the most important missiles were moved days earlier, a dramatic strike can still produce a much smaller strategic effect than the footage suggests. And that brings us to the emotional center of this entire story. Underground missile bases are not just storage spaces, they are symbols. To Iran, they represent survival, deterrence, and independence under pressure. They say, you may hit us, but you cannot disarm us quickly. To Iran's enemies, those same bases represent a hidden reserve of coercive power. They say, Even if the launchers go quiet for a day, there may be more below the surface. So every strike is also a message. If the attacker hits an underground site, the message is nowhere is fully safe. If the defender keeps launching after the strike, the message is you still have not solved the problem. That is why the story does not end with the explosion. In many ways, it starts there, because the real measure of success is not what burned that night. It is what the target can still do next week. And that is where later reporting becomes incredibly revealing. Satellite-based reporting in 2026 suggested that Iran had reopened tunnel entrances struck across multiple facilities. Roads that had been cratered were reportedly filled and, in some places, repaved. Analysts cited in those reports argued that burying tunnel mouths can create real tactical effects, but that is not the same as permanently eliminating the underground arsenal itself. Some experts also believed Iran still retained a significant number of missiles stored underground. Read that again in plain English. You can spend enormous money using some of the most advanced military systems on Earth. And the other side may answer part of that damage with bulldozers, dump trucks, front-end loaders, and time. That is the brutal logic of underground war. High-tech damage can meet low-tech recovery, and suddenly the title makes more sense. Inside Iran's underground missile base is not really about peeking inside a tunnel. It is about understanding a strategy that was built to survive pressure, absorb punishment, and keep enough capability alive to matter politically. Now, if you're watching this and finding value in the breakdown, here's your mission. Hit the like button like you're opening a blast door. Subscribe before the next upload drops, and send this video to the one person who always asks, yeah, but what does it really mean? So what does it really mean? First, it means location matters more than spectacle. Isfahan matters because of what surrounds it. Public reporting and open source research have linked the area not only to missile activity, but also to key parts of Iran's broader strategic infrastructure. That does not mean every tunnel in the region holds the same thing. It does not mean every blast proves a missile stockpile was destroyed. But it does mean the region is too important to treat casually. When strikes touch Isfahan, people are not just reacting to an isolated explosion. They are reacting to a pressure point in a much larger military system. Second, it means weapon type matters, but not in the simplistic way social media often suggests. People love the phrase bunker buster because it sounds final. It sounds like a cheat code. It sounds like once the right bomb arrives, the underground problem disappears. But that is not how it works. A penetrator is a tool, not magic. Its effect depends on geology, aim point, fuse timing, target layout, and intelligence quality. It also depends on whether the most valuable assets are still in place. The United States has a unique advantage here. The GBU-57 class of strike depends on rare aircraft, rare munitions, careful planning, and a high confidence judgment that the target is important enough to justify cost. And the cost issue matters more than many people realize. When a military uses a highly specialized weapon on an underground site, it is spending more than money. It is spending inventory, planning bandwidth, tanker support, intelligence effort, and political capital. If the result is unclear, the next decision gets harder. Do you hit again? Do you shift targets? Do you save rare munitions for something deeper or more dangerous later? That leads to the third point. Underground missile bases create strategic ambiguity on purpose. If an adversary cannot prove what survived, it has to plan for the worst case. That alone gives the buried force value. Maybe the stockpile is half intact. Maybe only a few launch chambers still work. Maybe the roads are blocked for now. But if nobody can be sure, the deterrent effect is still alive. This is one reason why states invest in hardened facilities even when they can be found. The goal is not invisibility forever. The goal is to make successful attack difficult, expensive, slow, and incomplete. And that is exactly the kind of problem Iran has tried to create. Over the years, Tehran has shown missile footage from tunnel complexes for a reason. Some of it is domestic messaging, some of it is deterrence theater. But part of it is also strategic signaling. It tells rivals something specific. It says, you may know we have these systems, but knowing they exist is not the same as being able to remove them. This is where the psychological battle gets intense. The attacker wants the world to believe the underground shield has been broken. The defender wants the world to believe the shield still works. Both sides have incentives to exaggerate. That is why we look for evidence. The most useful way to read these events is not through the loudest headline, but through the follow-on evidence. Are launches continuing? Are entrances reopened? Are roads repaired? Are supply chains recovering? Are rare strike assets being used again and again on the same category of target? Those clues often tell us more than the first dramatic claim ever will. Now let's bring this back to the U.S. strike question directly. What did the U.S. strike actually try to achieve when it targeted major underground Iranian infrastructure? At the most basic level, there are several goals. One goal is destruction. Kill the missiles, collapse the chambers, ruin the assembly lines, and make the underground site unusable. Another goal is suppression. Even if the deepest stockpile survives, you can still block entrances, break roads, damage power, disrupt command links, and slow operations. Another goal is signaling. You demonstrate reach. You tell Iran that no sanctuary is guaranteed. You also tell allies and rivals that you are willing to act. And another goal is leverage. A state under military pressure may enter talks from a weaker position if it believes its protected assets are no longer safe. These goals overlap, but they are not the same. A strike can succeed at signaling even if it only partly succeeds at destruction. It can succeed at short-term suppression while failing to create permanent disarmament. If viewers do not separate those ideas, they end up misunderstanding the event. This is also why the word explained in the title should mean more than naming bombs and aircraft. Real explanation means describing the contest of adaptation. Because Iran adapts, that reality becomes painfully clear when you study the recovery pattern. Construction equipment can reopen damaged tunnel entrances and roads. Repair crews can restore access faster than outsiders expect. And that low-tech recovery challenges the idea that bombing entrances alone can solve the problem. That is not a minor point. That is the point. Because if you can repeatedly hit a buried network but cannot permanently neutralize it, the war changes. It becomes a contest of pressure and recovery, a contest of expensive penetration against persistent reconstruction, a contest of precision against patience. And that contest is deeply uncomfortable for both sides. For the United States and its partners, it raises a hard question about resources. How many top-tier weapons do you spend chasing underground capability that can be partially restored with time and labor? For Iran, it raises an equally hard question. How long can you preserve deterrence if your bases, roads, and factories are repeatedly attacked? That is the central tension. Not one strike, not one tunnel, not one bomb. A long duel between survivability and pressure. And once you see the story that way, a lot of confusion falls away. You stop asking whether underground bases are invincible. They are not. You also stop asking whether bunker busters make underground bases obsolete. They do not. The truth is more unsettling. Buried military systems can be damaged, suppressed, and sometimes penetrated, but they can also survive in part and continue shaping strategy. If this breakdown is helping you cut through the noise, support the channel. Subscribe for clear thinking and leave a like so serious viewers find this. Share this with someone who still thinks every explosion tells the whole story. Now let's go one layer deeper into political importance. Why is missile infrastructure so politically important to Iran? Because missiles are not just weapons for Tehran, they are national leverage. Iran does not rely on the same kind of air power projection that the United States does. It cannot match Washington plane for plane. So it has invested for decades in asymmetric tools that raise the cost of attacking it. Missiles are one of the biggest of those tools. They let Iran threaten bases, cities, shipping routes, and regional rivals. They give Tehran a way to answer pressure without air superiority. They also create bargaining power. A state with a large missile arsenal does not enter negotiations empty-handed. That is why the bases matter. They matter even when the headlines are about nuclear sites. The missile force is part of how Iran protects itself and threatens retaliation. It tries to preserve room to negotiate. So if you damage that force, you're not only destroying hardware, you are shrinking leverage. And if you are Iran, that means underground protection is not optional. It becomes central to regime security. This is where the mountain matters. The mountain matters emotionally as well as militarily. It represents a promise by the state to itself. If the worst day comes, we will have something left. That promise is powerful. It reassures commanders. It reassures political leaders. It reassures domestic audiences that the country has prepared. But promises built into rock still face physics, intelligence, and repeated attack. And this is where the human side returns to the story. Think about the engineers who designed these tunnel systems over years. Think about the crews trained to move missiles in darkness. Think about the analysts on the other side who spent months studying shadows, access roads, vent patterns, convoy routes, and terrain. Underground war is often described through machines. But behind the machines are human minds trying to outthink each other. One side asks, how do we hide the essential thing? The other asks, if I cannot see the essential thing, what signs betray where it must be? That is why road damage matters. That is why tunnel entrances matter. That is why repaired craters matter. Small visible details become clues. When damaged entrances get reopened and roads get repaired, that is not just a construction update. It is a strategic clue. It suggests that despite major pressure, the network retained value. Reopening it was urgent, achievable, and worth the effort. And there's another uncomfortable truth here. Sometimes military power creates the appearance of finality faster than finality actually exists. A strike package may perform brilliantly. Pilots may hit assigned points. Missiles may arrive on time. Bombs may function as designed. Yet the strategic result can remain partial, contested, and temporary. That is not because the strike failed tactically. It is something deeper. It is because underground infrastructure is built precisely to turn tactical success into strategic uncertainty. This is why careful language matters. Public officials may say sites were destroyed. Opponents may say damage was minimal. Analysts may split the difference. But the wisest approach is usually to track what changes in capability over time. Can the missiles still move? Can the launchers still deploy? Can production restart? Can the entrances reopen? Can the roads be used again? Can pressure be sustained long enough to matter more than recovery? Those are the real questions. And they point to the most important insight of all. The strike is not just about blowing something up. It is about forcing a clock onto the other side. If Iran must spend time digging out and repairing roads, that itself is a form of damage. Even if part of the arsenal survives, the system becomes harder to operate smoothly. But if recovery is fast, the strategy still works. So who is really winning in that contest? The honest answer is, it depends on time. One night of explosions favors the attacker. Months of reopening entrances may favor the defender. Long campaigns test both. The attacker tests whether precision force can keep creating disruption. The defender tests whether buried depth, redundancy, and low-tech repair can keep enough capability alive. That is why the story stays unresolved. That unresolved feeling is not a flaw in the script. It is faithful to reality. In underground bases, certainty is the first casualty. If you want to help this channel grow, leave a like if you learned something, subscribe for scripts that respect your intelligence, and share this. So where does all of this leave us? Here is the clearest way to see it. Iran spent years building because it understood visible weakness. What can be seen can be targeted. What can be targeted can be lost fast. Buried systems are slower, more expensive, and harder to kill. The United States and its partners responded with a different logic. If the defender hides deeper, the attacker must strike harder and learn more. The attacker must keep pressure on the connective tissue of the system, not just its surface appearance. That means roads, entrances, and support points. Public reporting showed the U.S. was willing to use advanced capabilities against Iranian underground infrastructure, including Tomahawks and GBU-57 MOPs. That alone tells us how serious Washington considered the problem. Later reporting and analysis showed something just as important on the other side. Buried missile systems can remain strategically relevant even after major strikes because restoration and surviving stockpiles keep them alive as a threat. So the biggest mistake a viewer can make is to believe in simple endings. There was no magical era when mountains made missiles untouchable. There is no magical era now where one class of bomb makes mountains irrelevant. Instead, there's a dangerous middle ground. Both things are true at once. Underground bases can be hit. Underground bases can also endure. That is the lesson. And it is a serious one because it reaches beyond Iran. Any country watching this sees the same pattern. Deep protection still has value. But attackers are getting better at finding, isolating, and pressuring buried systems. At the same time, recovery does not always require high tech. Sometimes, the counter to an expensive precision campaign is persistence, labor, and enough surviving inventory to keep the threat alive. That creates a future in which underground military architecture remains attractive, but never fully comfortable. Safe enough to matter, it is unsafe enough to be constantly tested. And maybe that is the clearest way to understand the strike itself. It was a challenge. It was not just an attempt to destroy hardware. It was an attempt to challenge a whole theory of protection based on depth and leverage. It was a theory that rock can buy time, and that survival underground is enough to shape the behavior of enemies above ground. The U.S. strike said, in effect, we can still reach you. Iran's continued recovery efforts said, in effect, you still have not erased us. That is the real exchange. That is the real tension. And that is why people keep watching these mountains so closely. Not because they are mysterious in some cinematic way, but because hidden inside them is a very modern question. When military power disappears underground, can technology truly finish the job from above? So far, the answer looks incomplete. The strike can be powerful, the damage can be real, the message can be unmistakable, but as long as tunnel mouths reopen, it persists. As long as roads get repaired and launch capacity remains possible, the underground strategy is not dead. It is wounded, pressured, and exposed. But it is not erased. And in geopolitics, that difference is everything. Because wars are not shaped only by what is destroyed. They are shaped by what survives long enough to matter. They are shaped by what can be rebuilt and what each side still fears. That fear is why underground missile bases exist. That fear is why powerful states spend enormous resources trying to crack them. And that fear is why one strike, no matter how dramatic, never tells the whole story. The mountain is not important just because it is stone. It is important because it holds time, leverage, uncertainty, and the hope of survival. When hit, the question is no longer just about the blast. The question is what still remains in the dark. If you made it all the way here, do one last thing. Subscribe so you do not miss the next dive. Hit like and share this with a friend who wants the full picture, not just the headline. The most dangerous secrets are not always hidden. Sometimes they are the ones everybody knows are there, but nobody can fully measure. That is why the base story is so powerful. It is not a story about perfect safety. It is a story about trying to stay dangerous after being found. It is a story about fallback options. It is a story about weapons designed to punch through confidence. It is a story about conflict becoming a test of endurance. There's also one last reason this matters beyond the region. Every military planner in the world watches conflicts like this and takes notes. They ask what kind of bunker survived, what kind of road repair worked, and whether a buried arsenal still changed political decisions. In that sense, this is a preview of how future wars may be shaped wherever hardened underground systems become central to defense. Some countries will look at these events and conclude they need deeper tunnels, more entrances, more decoys, and faster engineering teams. Others will conclude they need better surveillance, better target fusion, more specialized penetrators, and tighter coordination for intelligence. In other words, both sides learn. And when both sides learn, the next round becomes more dangerous. The defender becomes harder to pin down. The attacker becomes more determined to reach what is buried. The line between deterrence and escalation gets thinner. That is why underground missile bases are so unsettling. They are defensive in one sense because they are meant to keep a force alive. But they are also offensive in effect because the survival of that force can be used to threaten others, pressure rivals, and shape negotiations. That dual role is what makes them so central to modern power politics. So when you hear a base was struck, do not just picture dust. Picture the argument underneath it. One side saying they can protect what matters, the other saying they can reach what you protect. That is the real battle line. And if you want more deep dives, now is the time to back the channel. Tap, like, and subscribe. Share this with someone who wants substance. The side that can hide, strike, and recover fast enough wins. The side that keeps the other guessing. That is why this story and the strike matter. And that is why the next satellite pass, repaired road, or blocked entrance will matter too. Because the battle for underground power is never decided in a single flash. It is decided in the long shadow that Flash leaves behind.